of the potential that this sector holds, not only for stakeholders in the civil aviation sector, but also for the 1.4 billion people in our country who are desirous, more and more so, to travel by air. This landmark transaction, very close on the heels of the Air India order. That order comprised of 470 aircraft, 250 with Airbus, 220 with Boeing. India has set another landmark with this largest ever recorded order by a carrier with any aircraft manufacturer in the world. What is also important to understand is the multiplier effects of civil aviation and the direct and indirect economic multiplier effects. Every dollar invested in civil aviation yields $3.1 in terms of new growth, as well as the employment multiplier. Every direct job in civil aviation results in 6.1 indirect jobs in the sector. And therefore, there are tremendous dividends that accrue from a ever-expanding civil aviation sector. As I have mentioned many times before, not only is the airline sector growing from a fleet size of 400 in 2014, we have witnessed a 75% growth to a fleet size of 700. We have witnessed the birth of many countrywide carriers like Akasa, regional carriers like India One Air, Star Air, and many others. But also, you have witnessed orders being placed by India's foremost carriers, which are greater than the size of India's total fleet in 2013-14. A fleet size of 400 in 2022-23 has been eclipsed by a single order of 470 aircraft by Air India and now a 500 plane order by Indigo. I must also underline here that whilst we look at an expanding fleet of civil aviation, 400 to 700 to hopefully close to 2,000 aircraft over the next 7 to 10 years, we're also looking at expanding our infrastructure footprint from 74 airports to 148 airports, waterdromes, and heliports. Growth in our 6 metros from 221 million throughput capacity on an annual basis to almost 420 million throughput capacity by the year 2030. And we're also looking at now creating, with this expanding footprint, creating an international civil aviation hub within India. For far too long, our hubs have been located outside our eastern border or outside our western border. And we're working at creating Delhi as the first hub. And I think that with the expansion of infrastructure, with the expansion of fleets, with the expansion of creating an international footprint within India, the Prime Minister's dream of democratizing civil aviation has now become a reality as civil aviation expands its reach. On the one hand, from our metros to our Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, and on the other hand, across the 7 seas to multiple continents across the world. And therefore, suffice to say that it's time to seize the skies, and I must congratulate the team at Indigo and wish them all the very best in the days to come.
So, on the engine part, there are still an element of doubt that what
I'm sorry?
Engine parts, the recent history with the Pratt and Whitney. So the experts suggest that the order size might be very massive one, but the engine selection and then the deliveries, that is still that has to be looked upon. Your take on the same.
As I mentioned to you before, that this is not the first order by this airline company. This order covers the period of expected demand as stated by them between 2030 and 2035. There is already an order in the pipeline of close to 380 aircraft for the period from now till 2030. I believe that the engines for those aircraft are pretty much finalized, and therefore when we're talking about the time period from 2030 to 35, between the A320s, the A321s and the A321 XLRs, which is being envisioned by Indigo, I think the engine finalization specs will be done in due course. And yes, there are supply chain issues which are being faced by aircraft manufacturers and engine manufacturers. We have very clearly experienced that, but I'm quite confident that as COVID has receded, those supply chain issues over the next few months will certainly be on the path toward resolution.
So order don't have the white planes in there, so it's a disappointment from the government side.
Sorry?
The order don't have the white size planes, and the government wants to encourage to buy a white carrier.
So, as I mentioned to you, this is a landmark event in the area of civil aviation, but I do not think that we should look at the fine print in terms of narrow-bodied versus wide-bodied, because it's no longer an area of black and white. It's an area of grey. For example, the A321s have a aeronautical range of roughly 3,800 kilometers. The A321 XLRs go up to almost 5,000 nautical miles, and therefore that provides you the bandwidth and the range to be able to fly these aircraft internationally as well. Having said that, it is Indigo's decision eventually, but I think they have also somewhere stated that they are looking at wide-bodied aircraft. In fact, they have also already wet leased some wide bodies and are in operation today. So I do not think you should sign on the dotted line as yet.
Any comment on, sir, MRO facilities that you already advocated?
So I have always mentioned to you that it is time now for the ecosystem of civil aviation to have a very firm footprint in India. This is an industry that works on economies of scale. This is an industry that works on market size, and that economies of scale argument and market size argument today has presented itself over the tenure of Prime Minister Modi's government. We have seen that taken firm foundation and firm roots. As you're also aware, one of the biggest MROs in the world and engine manufacturers in the world, Safran, has made its presence in India with its CFM servicing, engine servicing and sealant manufacturing facilities. They already have many facilities operating in India, and they have committed to $150 million investment to set up their CFM engine servicing and manufacturing capacity in India. So I'm looking very positively at MRO establishment, international MROs establishing themselves in India. We already have a very healthy domestic MRO space, which will also get further strengthened by this. Along with that, we have now aircraft manufacturing also taking firm root. We are already aware that Boeing and Airbus between themselves export close to about $1.6 billion worth of domestically manufactured products. Today, $1 billion by Airbus and about $600 million by Boeing. And that is also growing tremendously. Collins Aerospace is in India, Raytheon is in India, and now the Airbus joint venture with Tata's to manufacture the C295 facility in India is another 40,000 crore investment, where 5,265 sub-assemblies will be sourced from India. So a tremendous transfer of technology, investment will happen in India, and the aerospace and the space sector are the pioneers in terms of bringing forth new technology. And I think that with this large investment and continuing investments coming into India, we will see the ripple effects of that technology transfer coming into many other industries which are analogous with civil aviation.
So how do you see PM Modi's visit? It is anticipated that some deal regarding the GE engine is also supposed to happen. So what positive sides do you see?
Well, I think we should wait for the announcement of those announcements during the Prime Minister's visit. I think it will be a historic visit. The deepening trade ties, deepening diplomatic ties, and deepening global ties between the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy are getting further strengthened and cemented. Prime Minister Modi's leadership on the global stage is ushering a new era for India, an era within which India is reaffirming its ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbak and being not only a leader in terms of global thought, but also a leader in terms of global execution of ideas and implementation. And as opposed to being a follower, India has now transformed itself to being a leader in many multiple areas being pioneered by us.
Sir, what is the Make in India component? Just you said that there will be subsource 40,000 crores like that. So what is the total volume of the Make in India component?
That was of my reference was to the 40,000 crore joint venture between Tata's and Airbus for the manufacture of C295. And naturally, when a industry comes into India, the advantages and the ripple effects of that, as I've mentioned, through the 5,200 odd sub-assemblies that will happen in India, will accrue to many of our domestic manufacturers.
In the volume, in the rupees term, how much we can say that?
Well, that will, as I mentioned, it's a 56 plane order. 16 are going to be built in the facility in Spain and directly brought in from there. The balance 40 will be manufactured within India.
Sir, do you think it's the right time for Airbus to establish a manufacturing line in India with such a two giant outfits?
Well, I don't want to be. I do not think that it would be right for me to advise Airbus as to what to do in terms of its international strategy. That is for Airbus and Boeing to decide, but I think the time is ripe to look at India, and Airbus has already looked at India, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. As I mentioned before, the C295 facility is the first mammoth step that Airbus has taken in terms of setting up a manufacturing facility in India. It's going to be set up in Vadodara, and the Prime Minister laid the foundation stone for that. So Airbus is already here.
Sir, any comment on the airfare part? So much has been.
Well, I think more than commenting, I think all of you do your due diligence and analysis at a threadbare level, and you yourselves have seen the reduction in fares over the last 10 to 12 days. As I mentioned, I had taken a meeting on the 5th of June with all our airline companies, and we have seen a reduction across the board between 18% to 64% in terms of fares. But having said that, I also want to underline that do keep in mind that we had two extraneous factors come in. One, we were operating in peak season, and whilst we were operating in peak season, we saw the fleet of one of our airlines withdraw from operations. So you had a twin effect that came in during that time, due to which there were capacity constraints mainly on 3 or 4 routes, as I mentioned, but all of those have now been brought down based on the analysis that you yourselves are doing.
इंडिया टीवी हर वक्त हर जगह डाउनलोड करने के लिए सर्च करें इंडिया टीवी न्यूज़ गूगल प्ले स्टोर या ऐप स्टोर पर।